Yo, what it is, YouTube? It's your boy Nitsa coming back with another bullseye of a video here today on the channel. I wanted to speak about Mariah Carey's whopping $70,000 vocal chain. Mariah Carey is one of the highest selling artists of all time, and she's a legend in R&B and pop as well. I wanted to speak about her analog vocal chain and, you know, kind of like just the whole way that she's used this vocal chain and also her talent as well, which is very important to create this legendary career. So let's go into it right away. So the very first thing that I noticed is that Mariah Carey seems like she's very open-minded in regard to microphones. She used a couple of different microphones. In this video right here, it's looking like she used the Telefunken U47, which is a tube microphone, right? So, you know, this tube is very good because it actually helps give it a little bit of that body, right? So you're noticing a pattern amongst all of these artists that they're using these tube microphones, but they're using different types of tube microphones, right? They're in the same family, but all different people, you know what I mean? So that U47 is very, distinguishing in the way it actually gives you a smooth high end, right? I would say something like the Sony C800 or the C800G is also, a little bit brighter than this one specifically, in my opinion, how my ears hear it. But you also have to pay attention to, if you guys do want to get the C800, which is another microphone Mariah Carey uses, is that there's a difference between the C800 and then the C800G actually has a frequency response extending all the way out to about 18,000 hertz, right? So the C800 is 22,000 and the C800G is 18,000. So you guys need to understand that, at least, because if you're going to be purchasing a microphone like this, maybe down the line you save some money. You need to also understand that, that frequency response, right? But the C800G actually has a little bit of more of a boost, so it kind of comes off a little bit brighter, right? But the actual C800 itself has a more extended high end, right? So those are Mariah Carey's microphones. So as I was doing a little bit of my research, I stumbled upon this shot right here. It kind of looks like Mr. Nicholas Essig working in Westlake Studios. It's just the dashboard of that SSL console. Kind of looks like the dashboard right here, and also the speakers. They kind of look like tannoys. I'm not necessarily sure. But yeah, Mr. Nicholas Essig, he's a legendary engineer himself. He's been nominated and won some Grammys, and he's got a lot of work with many of our favorite artists that we love right here. So then I kind of did this video a little bit different. I didn't necessarily just want to look at, what he was using in the studio. Like I could have just took the easy way out and said, oh yeah, the CL1B going into a Neve 1073. But I wanted to make this video a little bit different, right? I wanted to say, hey, if I was in the studio with Mariah Carey, how would I build her vocal chain, right? So that brought me to this picture right here of, the man sitting right here and the studio as well, right? And, it's very important to have something that I call ear imagination, right? Even when you're purchasing a product, right? You need to understand that, hey, if I put this microphone with this preamp and this compressor, how is it going to sound, right? I mean, people know that they can go to the store and look at a shirt or a pair of pants and be like, So the same thing, you need to develop that ear imagination. Just like how you have the sight to see that something might not look good on you, you also have to have that ear imagination to hear that something might not be appropriate for your voice, because that's what it's always coming down to. What is the most appropriate thing for the artist? If you guys ever do have the opportunity of working with a legend like Mariah Carey, which I hope everybody does, at that very moment, you aren't going to be able to just lean on what worked for the next person. You're going to have to figure out, what is going to complement this song specifically. That might just actually help the artist be like, wow, you made me sound more different than anybody else I work with. Now I want to work with you. So that's why I'm always telling you guys to keep your mind open. Don't ever just go with the standard of whatever you see online, So the very good thing too, though, is that a lot of these studios have the same type of equipment because they want to create that quality of standard, right? Think about it. Whenever you go to McDonald's, right? It doesn't matter if you go to McDonald's in Miami or Los Angeles, the Big Mac sandwich is going to taste the same, right? So consistency is very important as an artist. They want to go in there and know I can go from high-end studio to high-end studio, and the same materials are going to be there to help me become successful, right? So another very important thing that we have to pay attention to, right, is these Avid HDIOs, right? which is the interface. Let's understand the history of Pro Tools. Pro Tools was there for the transition between out of the box, mixing to in the box mixing. That's not something that just happened overnight. So that's where Pro Tools came in. Originally Digi-Design. It started out with drum sampling, right? They wanted to be able to, sample drums, right? More than what came in the presets of like their little, samplers back in the day, right? So they had to use those first primitive kind of Digi-Design samplers and, for storage, right? So they had like certain chips and stuff like that. So over down the lines, we had the Avid HDIO. So we had these Avid HDIOs, which helped, do the transition from the analog signal to the digital, 80 to A conversion, whoop-de-whoop. You've heard all of that kind of stuff before, but it's very important to know that the Avid was one of the very primitive, kind of like models at its time. There was a point in time where, nobody else wanted to use anything but an Avid HDIO because it worked well with the console. It dumped into Pro Tools well. They got all of the editing capabilities of Pro Tools with all the benefits of how analog sounded, right? So that's how Pro Tools became the quote unquote industry standard through that. You have to understand the function of Pro Tools. Some people say, oh, I don't like Pro Tools because I can't make a hip hop beat inside of it. Well, you need to understand the history that you can make a beat in Pro Tools, but that's not what it was intended to be made for. So you need to understand, all of these tools, right? Don't ever just knock Pro Tools just because, you don't like to use it, because you never know, maybe down the line, there might be an opportunity for you as an engineer to get more money and help further your career. So, always keep yourself open-minded for equipment, programs, anything at all, right? Always keep yourself open-minded, right? Preamp that I would use for Mariah Carey. So as I was looking at the picture right here of Mr. Nicholas, it looks like they had some Avalon, preamps in there. So I would go with the Avalon 737, right? Which is a very beautiful preamp. I actually used one in real life in the studio that I was working in Miami a couple weeks ago. And it was very creamy, very, very rich sounding, right? And a part of that sound is coming from that amplification circuit. It's using vacuum tubes, specifically triode tubes. And with the triode tubes, they add some even order harmonics, which is very good because it adds some more density into that low end of Mariah Carey's vocal. We need to understand that Mariah Carey has a very fairy-like, very glossy, glamorous top end on her vocal. So, you don't really need to worry too much about that, giving her what she's already got, in general with the artist. You need to, help them, get a little bit more body if they have a high voice. So they're doing that using the vacuum tubes, right? You kind of helping that vocal kind of anchor the song because it's going to be down the middle, right? And you kind of do want Mariah Carey's, beautiful voice to kind of drive the music. And also the very beautiful thing about the Avalon is that you can actually use it as a de-esser. You can go over here into the, the sidechain and the EQ, and you can kind of like just have it to where it's only triggering the highs. But in a situation like this with Mariah Carey's vocal, I would go ahead and choose the next kind of piece of equipment that I seen in the studio with him, which was looking like a Fatso, right? Empirical Labs Fatso. And the beautiful thing about the Fatso is it's one of those pieces of gear that actually helps us visualize tape compression. Prior to the Fatso, I can't even think of anything else that would help us actually visualize the tape compression like through metering, right? And the beautiful thing about the Fatso is that it's very versatile, right? You have a bus, you have the 1176 compression, you have the tracking compression and the span. You have the kind of like a segregated type of compression where you have the high end warrant circuit, which is like an instantaneous high frequency limiter, right? So it's doing that kind of smoothing effect that tape would give you, but also it kind of has its own little separate compression at the bottom, and it gives you the option for a transformer. So let's look at the manual for the Fatso, and we got to understand too that with the Fatso, the tracking compressor is very musical and it's used to, record many instruments and other things along the lines of that. So I would pick that setting on the Fatso if I was recording Mariah Carey. And the beautiful thing about the warm circuit too is it kind of does it all the way up to 20K hertz, right? So that's why I was saying about the C800, it would be very important to understand the frequency range of that microphone and understanding that maybe the Fatso wouldn't be able to get all of it, but most microphones don't go all the way up there like the original, C800 does, So that's always something to keep in mind, the frequency response and how the compressor is going to be handling those frequencies as well as it's going in through the signal chain. And the last thing that I have right here is the beautiful SSL console. The SSL console was one of those revolutionary consoles. just due to the way that the SSL, it kind of brought in that automation system, right? It was using like a computer to also give a snapshot of the console, all of the settings. Prior to that, usually when people try to do recall, they had to have like these recall sheets, right? And on the recall sheets, even though when you bring up the console, everything, the settings perfect, it still might not sound like the original way the music was sounding before. And that's kind of a very important thing to understand, the luxury of having digital digital recording like we do nowadays. All you got to do is do a click and the session is exactly where you left it off from, so you just pick up. But with these solid state logic consoles, you got to understand too that a lot of the modules in the very first consoles were modular. Pretty much the channel strip was modular, and they were able to pop those modules in and out, right? Sometimes you're doing a session and then like channel 55 over there starts making a lot of noise, right? The channel over there might start making a lot of noise and you might have to go ahead and replace it. So they would turn off the console, go in there and just pop in a new channel strip pretty much. And, it looks like it's very beautiful nowadays. We have these new type of SSL mixers that actually allow you to get a 500 series chassis in there. So you can actually just completely just make it the way you want it to be. So that's coming back down to the Avid HDIO and the way that, when you're buying an interface, I think that you should also just be thinking about, hey, how many inputs and outputs am I going to need in the long term? Because maybe right now you're only thinking, oh, I need a microphone and, that's it. But maybe you might want to add some analog hardware, down the line. So it's always very important to consider your interface, how many potential inputs and outputs you can get. Sometimes they have an ADAT, maybe 1 or 2 ADATs where you can, use that Toslic cable to get more inputs and outputs. And let's look at how we would kind of get this signal chain inside of the universal audio. This is why I love this. So we can get the Telefunken 47 using a console right here, so we can use the Townsend microphone to get that. And then after that we would get the Avalon, and if I was recording Mariah, I'd only be using the preamp. That's it. Turn off the compressor. And then after that, in a situation like this, I'd go with the Fatso, right? I use a little bit of that transformer, just adding some more, contributing to more of that harmonic density in the low register. Keep adding on to more of that, that harmonic richness that we were getting from the tubes and the preamp. But this time I would do a little something different and use the transformer, right? And then I would use the tracking compression for Mariah Carey and probably a little bit of that warmth circuit. So sometimes you got to try something different, because maybe, a big artist comes through to the studio, you try something different, they're like, wow, my vocals sound so bright but so smooth. How did you get it like that? Well, maybe sometimes you got to try something different. You never know. And that could potentially change your life. And the last thing we would have is what? The SSLE channel strip, just adding a little bit of that, topping that presence and adding some more of the body to Mariah Carey's vocal. Probably none of the VCA type compression, because sometimes that voltage controlled amplifier type of compression, it can be a little bit aggressive and snappy. And that's kind of what we're going consistently right here with Mariah Carey's vocals. We want smoothness, creaminess, richness, triode tubes, then a little bit of that tape saturation. So different types of saturation, mixing and matching, tape saturation from the Fatso, and then tube saturation coming from the the preamp, right? So this is kind of my video here today. I wanted to do something different and not just go over the CL1B and the 1073. I'm just so tired of that combination. I wanted to do something different, and I'm pretty sure my next videos where I talk about gear are gonna all be like this, right? And I just want to say thanks a lot for being a great part of my YouTube family. Any comments, questions, concerns, drop it down below. Thanks a lot. Peace.